which country you're joining us from. We are honored to be here and to be telling the education data story in Africa while strengthening learning foundations for a brighter future through the Unlocking Data Initiative. The Unlocking Data Initiative tells the story of education data in Africa. It is pioneered by Zizi Afrique, EdTech Education Sub-Saharan Africa, known as ESSA, EdTech Hub, Effective Basic Services Africa, EBS, and the University of Malawi's Center for Education Research and Training, known as SAT. It aims to build a community of practice that connects education stakeholders for learning, sharing, and reusing data by expanding the accessibility users and producers of data in education system. This initiative seeks to address the knowledge gap of how to adaptively scale up the effective use of existing education data by policymakers and researchers. And we are focusing in Cameroon, Kenya, and Malawi. So we have a great agenda ahead of us, and we are looking at very good conversations. And starting us off, I would like to welcome my colleague Charles Gashoki from Zizi Afrique. He is a research manager for evidence use and synthesis at Zizi Afrique. Charles, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Gillian. Thank you, participants, to this active participation of Unlocking Data Initiative. We are pleased to host you because discussing data and evidence is what we do, and especially around the continent. And I'm pleased to introduce the distinguished panelists and speakers who are going to give us a chat on the purpose and objective of the Unlocking Data Initiative, particularly providing us with a brief history, the practice, and what the future holds for this initiative and the data and evidence space. And in this case, I'm trying to find out whether Maurice has joined. Someone tell me whether he has joined so that. Yes, I can see that Maurice has not joined. So the Unlocking Data Initiative, so I can take that part so that we move. The Unlocking Data Initiative is as Gillian has said, is an initiative of Zizi Afrique, a partnership of Zizi Afrique, EBS, SAT, EdTech, and ESSA. So the speakers who are supposed to go next are Maurice, and as I wait for Maurice to check in, Lucy Hedy, who heads ESSA. They have done a lot of extensive work on mapping foundation learning evidence in Sub-Saharan Africa. That's what they've been specializing on, and they have done quite a lot in that in terms of scope. Lucy, probably because of your passion for the education, especially data in Africa, which is amazing. And you've been here since the early phases of the Unlocking Data, the other phase, and now we are in a second phase. Can you kindly tell the participants the brief history of the Unlocking Data Initiative? Lucy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Charles, for that introduction. And I see Maurice is now online, so you can go. We'll just swap order, Maurice, and I will go, and then Charles can bring you in. But yes, thank you. Thank you for that great introduction. Now, this area that we're talking about today, how can we improve use of data to improve education across Africa? That is something that has been a high priority for all of the organizations that collaborate on this Unlocking Data initiative for a long time. For ESSA that works with researchers, we know this has always been a high priority for researchers, but I know our colleagues at Zizi Afrique, at University of Malawi, eBase, EdTech Hub, we have all separately seen this as a really important issue for a number of years. But the spark that brought us all together was actually was the pandemic. So in the early days of COVID, when many countries were in lockdown, we realized that the collection of new data was becoming pretty much impossible. And so the potential, the value of data that had already been collected, that already existed, suddenly became so much more important. And it was through conversations I had been having with John at Zizi Afrique that we decided, okay, well, let's actually use this time that we were going to spend doing some primary data collection, doing other things. Let's use this time to talk about how we can use the data that already exists. And so ESSA, Zizi Afrique and EdTech Hub, we collaborated to host a series of workshops to explore this question of how can we improve access to education data and use it to improve education systems in Africa. And we really focused on bringing out voices in Africa in those conversations. We were not looking for another donor-led project. We were looking for what was really going to help systems in Africa improve. And through those workshops, we learned some important lessons. I think the first was about the need for harmonized approaches that could then be used at the country level, so that change was really going to happen at the country level. While we wanted to have a continental level conversation, really change and action had to happen within countries. And the other was the value of bringing together a community of people who can share methodologies, share approaches, and share experiences. Those lessons were important, but I think on a really practical level, the most important thing for this work that we've done was how those sessions strengthened and cemented the relationship between the 5 partners who are speaking here today. So through that emerged this 5-organization partnership, as I say, ESSA, with Zizi Afrique, with EdTech Hub, with the University of Malawi and eBase, all organizations who were already working on and thinking about this problem and thinking, how could we collectively shift the conversation? And we've been working together to develop methodologies, to pilot those, increase our understanding, coming together regularly to share those experiences and insights. I guess it's been 4 years since COVID now, so for the last four years. And we're very excited now to have been given specific support by the IDRC through the KICS program to accelerate this work and broaden the conversation. So I'll hand back to you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy, for that brief history of. It has been long. It has been a long journey putting up data and putting it into perspective and mapping the data. And now that I see Maurice is here, Dr. Maurice is the Director of Research at Zizi Afrique, and he also has an extensive knowledge of the first phase of the Unlocking Data initiative. And Maurice, while you're on this, before you walked in, you were the one I wanted to introduce first. Now that you are here with me and with us, you can kindly briefly tell us what was the purpose and objective of the Unlocking Data Initiative? And when you are at it, what does it aim to achieve in Africa, and particularly to the 3 countries that we are working in, Kenya, Malawi, and Cameroon? Maurice.
Thank you, Chas, and thank you, everyone. And sorry for joining me later. The time I was almost joining, I got a distressing call and I had to address it. Sorry for that. It was not my intention to come here late. So, Charles, I think I pick up from one where Lucy has left, and in terms of the kind of conversations that took place before with particular individuals and organizations, and I say that people that were asked for change, but particularly in terms of trying to use how we can be able to utilize data to address some critical issues. And I know this conversation began also from the TVET part of it, but gives us an opportunity to reflect and see what does it mean, particularly the foundational learning. So the Unlocking Data Initiatives itself that we are talking about here is about scaling up uses and uses of data in the education system. And with a goal of addressing the knowledge gap, and particularly how to adapt and scale up effective innovations that exist within the education sector or even outside the education sector, so that you can be able to address pertinent issues. And particularly in this case, we are talking about foundational learning and with a focus on children that are 4 to 10 years. And I'm sure people know within the region in Africa, and particularly where we are, is that quite a number of children are in school, but they are not learning. And from the evidence that we know, almost 50% of children are not reading at the right level. When they're presented to text, they're not being able to live at that right level. And some of them, in some countries, even up to 90% from what I learned from the East African community, evidence that were presented last week in Arusha. So use of data and evidence in the education space, right from school to the national level, then becomes quite powerful for us to see whether we can be able to start changing this narrative. And I think this is where the origin of this scaling the Unlocking Data Initiative came to be. And in this case, we seek to answer kind of 4 questions. One is around objectives. One is around building knowledge on the effective ways to scaling up this approach. And I think that is so essential, not only for application within the foundational learning, but also generating evidence that can be utilized to start addressing other issues that are pertinent within the education and that call for attention and use of evidence. The second thing is that looking at the system and trying to look on what capacity needs are there for policymakers and researchers to be able to assess and utilize data, particularly in policy formulation, but also in decision-making and implementation of initiatives. So from the discussion and moving this from where Lucy and the team picked it, then moving it to a level whereby we know we have within the decision-making capacities that can be able to utilize the evidence. But more importantly is actually knowledge mobilization. And this is where we also have communities of learning, particularly in terms of what are the best practices, we've been able to learn from one context to the other, and how we can be able to utilize some of those knowledge that is already existing to improve foundational learning. And lastly, it's about public goods. And in this case, it's building knowledge and around approaches to data collection, approaches to sharing evidence, and particularly generation of public goods, and ensuring that those groups that are likely to be left farthest are brought to board. Those groups that most are affected by this problem of foundational learning, they're actually addressed. And in this case, we are learning, and we are using a kind of a cyclic approach to it, such that we are generating evidence to inform scaling up and inclusion, improvement of foundational learning, but as well as us learning and trying to see how we can be able to position ourselves to be able to inform the education space better. Thank you, Charles Adova.
Yeah, thank you, Maurice, for that direction that the Unlocking Data Initiative is taking, and telling us what it aims to achieve in the long run and in the continent. Just to remind our participants that this initiative is active in Kenya, Cameroon, and Malawi. That's where we are working in currently, so that we see how can this be upscaled to other countries. And it's because it is our data that we should correct. We are the only ones who can tell our story. So it's important that we correct our own data, to use our own data to influence policy making. Thank you so much, Maurice and Lucy, for that brief history, the objectives, and the purpose of the Unlocking Data Initiative. I want to welcome Esme from Cameroon to take over so that we can have the next session. Esme.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. A correction, Charles, you have promoted me to go to Cameroon. I'm from Malawi, and I want to thank the previous speakers, Charles, Lucy, and John, who have touched on the country engagement aspects. And at this juncture, would like to dive into why Unlocking Data Initiative is important in Africa, and particularly for our countries and our ministries of education. So this time I would like to appreciate and welcome three esteemed colleagues from the ministries of education in the three countries. From Kenya, we have Bartholomew Lumbasi, who is Director of Policy Partnership and East African Affairs at the Ministry of Education in Kenya. Then from Cameroon, we have Mr. Tomo Joseph, Technical Advisor to Ministry of Basic Education. And from Malawi, we have Mr. Lanken Nkata, Head of EMIS in the Education Planning Directorate of the Ministry of Education. And these speakers will tell us why Unlocking Data Initiative is important in the three countries and to the ministries of education. I now invite, in the same order I've mentioned, the speakers, Bartholomew, to start, and then after that, it will be Mr. Joseph, then lastly, Mr. Nkata. Over to you. Thank you.
Esme, I'm not sure whether Mr. Lumbasi has joined. I've just seen the text of him saying that he's joining. I don't think he's here. Possibly we can begin with the others, and then when he joins, then he can pick it up.
Yeah, we can do.
Okay, who is here?
Lumbasi last.
Okay, so we can start with Mr. Lumbasi.
We can begin with Joseph.
Oh, okay, Joseph. Okay, Mr. Joseph, can you start, please? Then after that, Lanken.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. And can you hear me?
Yes, quite clearly, please. Go ahead.
Yes,
okay,
Joseph,
good
we can
afternoon,
hear you.
Everybody. And welcome to Yaoundé, Cameroon. Yaoundé, the land of the town of Seven Hills. I'm not sure I'll be talking quite confidently in the light of what you expect, but I want to say some of the issues that we have been going on with as far as data is concerned, and how the data so far has been useful in education in Cameroon. So far, the Ministry of Basic Education, as of now, has carried out a number of programs which are data-driven. The first one that comes to mind is a World Bank project that came as a result of an evaluation of the basic education sector between 2005 up to 2010 by a body called SWEFCO. And that came out with results showing that children in the basic education sector performed particularly very poorly in literacy and numeracy. Those results initially were not understood by the stakeholders because the stakeholders had not yet been well sensitized as far as data-driven decisions are concerned. And when those results were presented, there were lots and lots of resistance. And I bet you those who were present then almost assaulted those who presented. And it was like the results were some reflections of failures of those who were in charge. However, taking into account those results, some attempts were made to address the issues that were raised by those results. But those attempts were not enough. And concretely, from 2013, 2014, specifically 2014, the PASEC, which is the program for the analysis of the education system of the Francophonie, I'm sure most of you must have heard of it. PASEC in 2014 carried out a grouped evaluation of 14 Francophone countries, including Cameroon, which has the particularity of running two education subsectors, the Francophone and the Anglophone subsector. In 2019, the same similar evaluation was carried out. That in 2014, we had 10 countries, and in 2015, we moved from 10 to 14 countries that were involved in this grouped evaluation. Now, the results systematically were similar, showing that the results were very, very catastrophic at the beginning and the end of schooling. And the subjects that were examined were were language, English and French, and mathematics for early grade 2, class 2, and class 6, which is the final year. Now, in 2014, the factors affecting poor results by children were discovered to be linked to the background of the children, maybe the parents of the children, the background of the parents, the region where they come from, and so on and so forth, and the teachers. And in 2019, because of the teacher factor, another element was included in the results that had to do in the evaluation of 2019 that had to do with the testing of teachers. Teachers' tests were to be tested in methodology, in didactics, and in content. And the results still showed that teachers lacked a mastery of not only the contents, but also the methodology of teaching these subjects. And the question is, how would we expect children to perform well in subjects when the teachers teaching them have difficulties in mastering the subject matter and in mastering how to put across the subject matter to learners. This, in addition to the other shortcomings, the lack of textbooks by the children, the zone where they come from. I'm talking about the zone. Cameroon has been divided into 2 major zones. You have 4 regions of Cameroon, which are called education priority zones. That is the East region, the North, the Adamawa and the Far North, and the others. And so now, they taking cognizance of these results, the stakeholders, the ministry and the partners of the ministry, the financial and technical partners, started reading meaning into these results and started realizing that it was important to address these results. And that is when a major project was conceived by the World Bank, which is currently going on, called there is a program for the amelioration of the education quality of Cameroon, called PAREC. And this program has a number of pillars. It has up to 7 pillars. And among the pillars, I would like to cite a number of them. One pillar has to do with the recruitment of 3,000 teachers every year over a period of 5 years. I think they're in the 4th phase now. Another one has to do with training of teachers, a huge number of teachers, recycling teachers to address the issue of that has to do with shortcomings as far as teachers are concerned. Another one has to do with the supply of textbooks, necessary textbooks to schools. And talking about those necessary textbooks, we are talking about essential textbooks, which are textbooks in mathematics, textbooks in reading to address the issues of literacy and numeracy. So these are this is how the government tried to address it. And I did talk about the education priority zones. One of our major partners is the French Development Agency, better known by its French acronym as AFD. They got interested in the results and wanted to address the shortcomings coming from the education priority zones. So for over a period of 3 years, they sponsored a program that had to do with the remediation of teachers in these particular zones. And how did the remediation, how was it carried on? It had to go from identifying the shortcomings addressed by the results. It means that we had to carry out an in-depth study of the results as presented from the evaluations to identify the key areas in numeracy and literacy where teachers were found wanting, where children were found wanting, and where teachers were found wanting, and to cross them, do a certain hierarchical arrangement to see which of them were most urgent to be addressed, following the syllabuses, and then develop modules to train teachers in the field through a hierarchical training program to address this shortcomings. For the past 3 years,
Joseph,
and
I
this year that
Hello?
we are talking.
Joseph, I have to cut you short because of time.
Yeah.
We have two
Yes.
other speakers to speak, so can you wind up, please?
Okay, so just to say, as a matter of to round up, that for Cameroon, our key source of data that has actually driven policy have been focusing on evaluation results coming from PASEC. Now we have eBase that is coming in, and we are about engaging with eBase to see how they can join with the results that are coming from PASEC, what they can add to what we are getting from PASEC, so that the ministry can make more better informed decisions. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Without wasting time, I want to invite Lanken to come and tell us why we have heard from previous speakers that the Unlocking Data Initiative is about expanding users and users of data in education. So can Lanken tell us how this initiative will help the Ministry of Education in Malawi in the endeavors to produce policy based on evidence. Over to you, Lanken.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Clearly,
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I joined a bit late. I was having issues with my internet. Yeah, so I'll give a brief background on how data management has evolved in the ministry from the years, and where we are now, and how such initiatives are going to propel the use of data even more. So before I would say perhaps before 2010, somewhere there, the ministry did not have a statistical unit, like a standing statistical unit. So because there was need for data, the ministry decided to institute its own education management information system by employing their own statisticians. Now, over time, there was a growing need for much more quality data. The mandate of producing sector statistics in the government rests with the National Statistical Office. So the National Statistical Office came in and instituted a full-blown statistical unit that we have now, which produces education sector statistics every year. We conduct a census every year, and we produce a report every year. The reason behind is that we are able to produce data that can be timely, so that timely decisions are made in the education sector. The information that we collect and the data we collect, the information we produce is quite varying, and we produce student data, we produce school level data like school identification and such data. We produce data on teaching and learning materials. We produce data on our teachers, and this covers both sectors, primary, secondary, as well as higher institution. Further to that, we know that there are certain decisions that are supposed to be made through perhaps assessments in terms of how learners are performing, and in collaboration with other departments in the ministry, we conduct the this is the monitoring learning achievement. It's a locally administered survey that administers tests to learners in primary school and see how they're performing in the different proficiencies. So this is done in conjunction with the Malawi National Examination Board. We also have the SACMEC. The SACMEC is the Southern and Eastern African Consortium for Monitoring Educational Quality. This is done in several countries, I think 16 member countries, where we administer similar exams to standard 7 learners. And we also look at the home factors that may affect the learners' performance in the schools. So when the results are produced, we're able to compare across other countries how learners are performing. Now, we also have different projects in the ministry, which are trying to improve the learning environment and the learning outcomes. In terms of the primary school, we have what we call the Malawi Education Malawi Education Reform Program. This one stems to an area program which was called MESIP, Malawi Education Sector Implementation Plan, which was a pilot in 8 districts. After the success of that one, we have the Malawi Education Reform Program, which has scaled up to all education districts. By the way, we have 34 education districts in the country. Now, among the project has different components. So among them is a component which deals with okay, so the education, a brief background, the education system is structured here in a way that you come from ministry headquarters and then you go to the districts. I think in other countries, these are called provinces. We have the geographical districts, which are 28, but here, because of administration of the education sector, we have 34 of them because other districts are very huge to be managed as the one district. From there, they go to the zones, and then the school. One zone has on average like 15 to 20 schools. So this project is created an assessment. It's called the Common Zonal Test, where a standardized exam is administered to all the schools or at the zonal level. And then results are produced. And so as our role in making our role as data as MIS is that we analyze these results after the learners have written the exams and then they have been marked. They give the data to us. We analyze the results. After we analyze these results, we produce what we call a report card. These report cards are produced by zone, by school rather. Every school has receives this report card. This report card details how the school has performed. Firstly, in all the subjects, that means like 3 subjects: mathematics, language, and the Chichewa. Chichewa is a local language subject. And then that means that in standards 3 and 4. And then that means we produce results by class, by subject, and by gender. And then how the school is faring in relation to other schools in the zone. So the importance of this feedback process is that when we produce this report card, it shows clearly how the school has performed. This is the when we are disseminating these report cards, it is done with the school management as well as the community, where you have parents, teachers association, whether school management committees. They are part of the dissemination to see how the school is performing in these examinations. This will helps the schools to make decisions on how best they can improve. And they also have how they relation on how they've performed against other schools in the zone. So
Lanken, Lanken, you've got 1 minute remaining. Can you wind up, please? Thank you.
So you should have told me before how much time I had. That's fine. I'm winding up. Thank you, Esme. Yeah. So basically, this is a round and round process where we provide feedback to the schools on how they are performing so that they can do better. All this is providing evidence to schools and to management. We also do a national level analysis on how the situation is on the ground and how best decisions can be made in order to improve the situation. I think in a nutshell, that's what I'll bring on the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lanken. And lastly but not least, I now invite Lumbasi to present on Kenya perspective. And, we will have to finish at 10 to, my time will be 10 to 4. So you have got about, I'll give you about 10 minutes since I'm sorry the previous speakers I didn't mention the time limit. So you have 10 minutes to tell us, you know, from your perspective, why you think the Unlocking Data Initiative is important to your country, in particular to the Ministry of Education. Over to you, Lumbasi.
Yeah. Thank you so much. My name is Lumbasi, as you've heard, and I want to thank you for convening this meeting and for allowing us to exchange ideas on the essence of data and how important it is in unlocking the big potentials that we have in enhancing learning in our education system. In Kenya, this dates back to 1998, when we had attempt from and support from World Bank in establishing EMIS, which has evolved over time, and currently with the support from the World Bank and the GP grant that we received, we had KEMIS in place, and we are strengthening this so that we can have a holistic integrated data that is cuts across different sectors. And what we have achieved out of the national education management system is that we are able to collect data, and this data has been very important in allocation of resources, especially with capitation and teacher deployment, as well as deployment and construction in schools, that's in form of infrastructure grants. And the most unique one is that the learners were able to get support for health through EduAfya, where they could get access to free treatment. In order to track the learning achievements in terms of literacy and numeracy, Kenya has been supported and been participating in the first studies that were supported by the bank with USAID, EGRA, and EGMA, which were able to measure the elements in terms of literacy and numeracy. And out of this particular feedback that we had, the government policy on textbooks was changed, and we are able to achieve provision of literacy materials and numeracy numeracy textbooks to schools at a ratio of 1:1, and we are glad that this was able to help us. And all this is aimed at improving the literacy and the numeracy levels. And also for us to compare ourselves in the region, we participate in SACMEC, and currently Kenya is participating in PISA. And all this data is generated to enable us to establish where are we as a country. And therefore, the biggest issue here and challenge has been a lot of data is mined, but this data is not synthesized in good time to help us to have strategic level decisions being made in ensuring that we are responding to the needs of the cohort in good time. And therefore, if currently the government is re-engineering KEMIS, and we are sure that leveraging on technological apps will be able to get this data in real time. Another thing that in line with the digitization of our economy, as per the president, the Kenya National Examination Council has embarked on e-assessment, which gives us a very big opportunity through the CBC to assess these learners and establish their levels in terms of literacy and numeracy. And therefore, we look at this data as very important, because we are able to know what strategic interventions in terms of retooling of our teacher, changing the pre-service teacher training, and improving on our governance structures to enhance accountability and transparency. So data is very important, because it ensures that we utilize this in good time. And therefore, we are saying that if we establish and expand on and build, strengthen the capacity of governments and other stakeholders, so that we can collaborate in ensuring that we have a responsive, flexible, reliable, adaptive data management systems that will provide us with reliable data for decision making in education, it is very, very key. And this is going to drive and change and depoliticize the education landscape in our region. Thank you so much, and allow me to stop here so that maybe we can have further engagement. And this is not only done by by the Ministry of Education. Currently, we are undertaking the school census. Interior, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, the National Treasury, which allocates the resources through a multi-sectoral approach so that we can have reliable data for the sector is key. And that is what we are doing as a country. Thank you so much. And we are willing and looking forward to learn from others. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lumbasi, and thank you, the other two speakers. We have heard from our colleagues from the Ministries of Education in Kenya, Cameroon, and Malawi about the vast amount of data that they are collecting. And we have also had different initiatives that are in relation to data that is happening in all the three countries. And indeed, this initiative is supposed to unlock that data for users to further analyze that data that is available, to produce evidence for the education sector. So we are happy to hear from our Kenyan colleague to say that they are welcoming this initiative so that we can work together, use that data to produce evidence. At this juncture, I want to introduce Patrick. Patrick is a colleague from IDRC who will lead the next session. Patrick, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, all the previous speakers. We're really happy to listen in to the very interesting stuff that is happening in all those countries. The next session, the topic we focus on why connecting data, synthesizing evidence, and democratization of evidence is important. And for this, I'm going to invite Dr. John Mugo, who is the Executive Director of Zizi Afrique, to lead us in this discussion. And I'll be posing a few questions to him, and we shall be able to dissect this topic. And if you have any questions, perhaps you put them down, and we'll address them. So in the interest of time, this is John. Happy to meet you. Maybe you want to say a word or two before I pose my questions to you.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning, colleagues. It's really exciting to be here discussing about unlocking data and the potential this has for accelerating the acquisition of foundational learning competences. Policies are dependent on data, but also decisions that teachers and parents could make to support the learning of children. So I'm happy, Patrick, about this.
Great to hear from you. So, John, you lead in the call for data collected by Africans for Africans. What is the situation of foundational learning data and evidence in Africa, especially in decision making? I know you've hinted a bit on that before, just right now, but maybe, if you don't mind, maybe expound a little bit more on that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's true that I am at the front in calling for greater agency of African researchers. We know that the story of Africa has largely been told by others, and we have reports by ESSA and by others who have been working on higher education. And when you look at our research productivity is indeed low, you look at gender balance in who publishes and where things are published and how accessible they are. So I'm hoping, and I'm so happy, I've seen many colleagues from University of Malawi, from University of Addis Ababa, University of Nairobi, that our agency matters. But this conversation is around foundational learning, because the researchers at the university and researchers in research institutes ought to indeed adopt foundational learning as a key theme for our research. I talk about the good and the bad. I think from what we have heard from Joseph, from Lanken, from Lumbasi, there's a lot of data being produced, which is a really nice thing. We have assessment data, we have program data, even from government and World Bank and other large-scale programs and interventions. But we also have evaluation data available increasingly. The second thing around this is that we have emerging, we have independent assessments also. And I've seen some colleagues here from the People's Action for Learning Network, from UEZO, from others, even mixed by UNICEF, NASIMLA, and others by government. But also PASEC has been mentioned here. We know SACMEC is dead. I hope it will resurrect. And all these others, Lumbasi mentioned even PISA, and more African countries are getting to do PISA. The third thing is the expansion of data beyond just literacy and numeracy, and the concept of foundational learning being beyond just reading and being numerate, to include also other competencies that we know are very key for our children in Africa and for our competitiveness as a nation. So we have several assessments that we are now starting to supply data on social emotional learning competencies, on things that are not just easy to measure. And we have these assessments also by various countries. And so, but when you look at all this, now I come to the bad. One is that we have a lot of forward flow, a lot of data supply from classes, from teachers to, NEMIS and KES. But the backward flow, which actually is what determines impact, is hardly there. We hardly have examinations data coming back to the classroom level. We hardly have these large-scale assessments getting to have meaning for the teacher and what they should do to improve learning. The second is researchers. We are here speaking to ourselves, but that concept of teachers as researchers and the reality of action research is hardly there. So John Mogo can have a lot of data, have all the wisdom, have all the knowledge, but I don't teach any children. So we cannot improve foundational learning by accessing data and talking more about it. It will have to be the teacher teaching, collecting data and using it for the purpose of improving learning. And so this backward flow, but also capacities of teachers. And then quality assurance ought to be actually that bridge between data and decision. And so when a quality assurance officer sits in a lesson, are collecting data, capturing and giving feedback to the teacher so that they're able to use it. We know that quality assurance in most of the African countries is either muted by the system strategically and very purposively, so that there's no accountability, but also are not facilitated. And the schools that need a lot of quality assurance support are the ones that get it least, which again is an irony. And lastly, Patrick, some countries in sub-Saharan Africa seem to be almost forgotten. We have data from many countries like Kenya. I think the countries here. I'm happy Cameroon and IBIS is trying to do this because we have hardly seen Cameroon popping up apart from PASEC. Countries like Burundi, and when you look at data. So I think there's a lot to work on, and I'm so happy that this conversation and this program is picking some of these issues up. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, John. I really like what you've mentioned, particularly about giving us that balance and that discussion around the supply side of data, but then also what you call the backward flow, where there's a lot of issues that we need to address. So my next question is, in your experience, what are the data politics and around democratization of data? Could you speak to us about that and what it means to this discussion? Thank you.
Yeah, as we all know, data is very political. Data is heavily guarded. But I think I add something to that question. Also, this separation of researchers and politicians that doesn't serve data utilization. So I have 5 thoughts and to just provoke the participants a little bit. The first one is about the meaning and importance of opening data. So when we look at data, there are 3 things that are important. One is availability. How is data accessed? Second is accuracy. I know many countries have NEMIS, but when you look at the range of indicators and the usefulness of the data that NEMIS gives, hardly about learning outcomes, it's just about numbers of infrastructure and other such things. And that is timeliness. And I think it's Lumbasi who spoke to this. A lot of data comes too late when it's too old to to help make decisions. So it is an irony that even those of us that are funded by other people, you'd find ZZ-Afrique conducting a study that is 100% fully funded by a funder, but still holding onto that data and saying it's ours instead of opening it. But even government is funded by the taxpayer. So why should government be keeping official data to itself? That data belongs to citizens because it is citizens funding it. So I think this concept of opening data, it needs to be pushed. Data ought to be available to everyone so that then even a parent, a teacher somewhere can be using data to make decisions. And that's the first thought that I put forward. The second is data getting to speak to politics a little more. And here, when you look at like now the politics around SDG 4.11 that PAL Network has been leading us to try and protect because UIS is saying there's not enough data, and the death of SACMEC, you wonder whether this is deliberate somewhere, and the politics of money. Because why would someone say there is no data, so we downgrade or we remove an indicator? Because then it means that we are going back to just considering access and not learning. And yet, foundational learning is about learning. It's not about children attending school. It's about children having the grade level competencies that are so critical for their eventual learning. So how do we have system data? Like now in Kenya, for instance, we have a grade 3 assessment that is national. Every child completing grade 3, at the end of grade 3, an assessment is conducted nationally. We never see any conversations around how many of our grade 3 children were able to read and where is the issue. So this thing of collecting data and keeping it, you know, how do we have parliament asking for the findings of this and pushing, you know, those that are technocrats making decisions to use data? That is the synthesis of data and unearthing salient qualities, you know, for policy, for resourcing, for scaling, and especially the focus on inequality in our education. We know that we hardly have child level data. I think it was Joseph, but also Lanken who spoke about it was Lanken who spoke about the scorecard. But when you rank schools, that doesn't tell us much and it doesn't help us to change much. What would help is that scorecard within a school, for instance, to look at the 40, the 50, the 100 learners, who is falling behind and why? And how would remediation and other interventions help? So that is not just about talking about schools and about big things, but it's about the life of an individual child. So how can we have data telling stories that need to inform policies, inform the targeting of resources, how government appropriates funding, these flat rate capitations that don't serve the minorities and so on. The fourth aspect is around capacities for data utilization at lower levels. How do we have those officers at the district level, the officers at the ward, you know, at the location level, being able, you know, not just to forward data that is coming to school to somewhere else and to NEMIS, but also to interpret that for their context and be able to use it. How do we have teachers, school leaders, you know, those head teachers, being able to analyze data on a running basis and making decisions at that local level? So these capacities, I think it is one thing to have data, it is another to unlock the capacities. And this is what our initiative is trying to do. And last is around scholarship policies in our universities. In many of our African universities, the students for masters and PhD must collect primary data, and yet they are not funded. So even those studying disciplines like economics, education economics, they must go collect data. So what happens is that we have universities full of data, of results, of findings that can't help anyone. From 5 schools, some just change the title from one district to another. Instead of saying, ZZ-Afrique is is having a lot of data because we are funded to do research, APHRC, EBIS. How do we have partnership with the university so that PhDs, instead of going to collect and you work on little micro data, come and use this larger scale data, even from NEMIS, from examinations councils, to create knowledge around this and be able to simplify it for utilization. So I think all these webs need somehow to be broken to unlock data so that we have utilization of evidence to make difference. Patrick.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And I think you address a lot of things that that should be coming up as well in my last question. I really like the different, you really asking very provoking questions, and I believe those that have reactions, you have the chat to place them in there. But I like what you've talked about in respect to inequality, in respect to the capacity of the use of data, especially at the lower levels, and you know, those kinds of things, and so many nice things that you talked about. So let me ask my last question on which is something that you've touched on in different dimensions on question 1 and question 2. How can we increase the use and the users of data, stroke evidence in our decision-making in foundational learning? I know we talked about it in different ways, but in summary, how do you think we should go about it?
Let me just speak to 3 things. One is data policies to support more opening and access to data. And as I said, examinations data, for instance, can give us a lot of knowledge and a lot of things to make decisions, but who accesses it? It is heavily guarded and no one can analyze it. We have been trying, to partner with the Examinations Council to support making sense out of this data, so that then the right decisions are able to be made at the various levels. But then policies don't allow, even if you remove names of the students, names of the learners, still that cannot be accessed. So we have a lot of impediments. The people with very large scale data, even on foundational learning that can inform movement, who start with government, is not being accessed by very good analysts so that we are able to create knowledge. The second, I think, in terms of increasing use is also financing and how research is funded. A lot of funders want to fund just collect data, analyze, give us a report, but not dissemination and mobilization, knowledge mobilization. And so funders of research allowing for budgets so that researchers can increasingly also become politicians, as we push for politicians to become researchers and be able to interpret and understand data. So that I think is a critical component. And the third that I spoke about is capacities. How do we, on the one hand, simplify data so that it can make meaning to a parent, to a teacher somewhere? That's what a PAL network does with the citizen-led assessments. But on the other hand, how do we train teachers? Like one of the things I'm working and have suggested to Kenyatta University, which is my university, can we, instead of training teachers the general research methods, which is really good, teachers have like 2 research courses they must complete, but we teach them like they are going to become researchers, and so they go out with nothing. How do we minimize the research we teach teachers to just action research on what data will you be collecting as you teach? How will you analyze it? How will you use it? If we were to do that, and then whoever wants to be a researcher can come back for masters, but whoever is going to teach in the classroom, what they need is research that makes meaning for context. And that, as I've spoken about, I think universities honestly need to change their policies. There ought to be more partnerships across, because there is less and less funding for research going to the university. And so whatever makes meaning is collaborating with government so that economists at the university can be working on examinations data to do their thesis, can be working on NEMIS data to do their thesis, can be working on all these other larger data. So that way, we will be growing use on the one hand, but also growing the users of data on the other. Thank you, Patrick.
All right, thank you so much, John. This is very interesting. So many questions. I know there are so many things that we would still want to ask you, but unfortunately, the time is working against us, and we need to stop. Thank you so much. You've summarized for us the situation of foundational learning data and evidence in Africa. You talked about the data politics in Africa and around democratization, and how we can increase the use of data. And may I also point out that there's some reactions as well for you in the chat. Maybe feel free to just get in there and answer. If you have any other questions for John, please place them in the chat as well. Thank you so much, John. This is very interesting, and we look forward to hearing more on the rest. Thank you. So I need to invite I'm inviting Lucy. Yes.
Yes.
Inviting Lucy to speak to us about Spotlight, community engagement through communities of practice. I think that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Patrick. I don't quite know how to follow such a fantastic session. And thank you to all of the speakers we've had so far. If you're anything like me, you've been sitting there listening to all of the speakers, thinking about how this is relevant to your work, thinking about what does that mean for the future. I'm going to ask you to come out of that contemplative mode and get ready for a bit of interaction for the last part of this webinar today. So I'm going to talk about, what we're going to talk about now is the next steps in terms of growing a community of practice, a community of people who are committed to increasing the use and users of data. So far, the Unlocking Data initiative, it has really been a community effort. It has been through the support of colleagues that we have got as far as we have got today. And we are very excited now that with support from IDRC, we are in a position to grow that community of practice beyond the 5 partner organisations here. And bring on board colleagues who are looking for support in ongoing projects, who are looking for inspiration for starting new pieces of work, or simply to connect with like-minded people across the continent. But we want to do that with your input. It's not going to work if we decide by ourselves what you want. We need to hear from you. So first of all, I'd like anyone here who's listening who has been part of a community of practice in the past, just to raise their hand. So if you go to the bottom of your Zoom window, you can see there's a raise hand function. Please do put up your hand if you have been involved in a community of practice in the past, or now, or still are. I'll give people a few moments to find the button. I can see more people are putting up their hands. So we have a few actually from the panelists, maybe more from the panelists, a couple from our 3 from the attendees. Would anyone of the attendees be happy to share their experience of being part of a community of practice? Maybe tell us what community you're part of and how you got involved. I don't know, maybe Nelson, if you would be happy to contribute, Nelson or Ada. Hi, Nelson.
Hi, hi, Lucy. Yeah, so I've been part of different communities. I've been involved in one in there's a partnership I'm doing with one of my friends. He's involved in IGSC, curriculum that is within education. Yeah, so we are kind of partnering. I'm offering the technology and he's offering the domain expertise. He's a teacher, I'm a technologist. I do web development and also data analytics. Yeah, so from that kind of engagement with him, we're trying to kind of build a solution that is for students, especially within the international curriculum, because most of them, within that domain, most of them actually travel a lot. And the kind of problem that we find out is that there's that kind of seamless kind of education that we want to implement. That is, we want that whenever the student migrates to maybe a different country, there's normally disruption in terms of changes that are made, maybe changing to a different teacher or something of that sort. So the kind of solution we want to build is that whenever the student kind of gets that touch with the teacher that they want, they can be able to involve with them despite of the country that wherever they are in. So that's the solution, basically what you're currently trying to build. Yeah, so the challenge there's a bit of challenge because in regards to the technology, we are working on it, and it's almost 90% done to be able to get to that position where now it's now seamlessly done. But now when it comes to the physical infrastructure is when the challenge comes in. Because other than just having the whole spectrum of being, because normally it's not normally personalized. So normally within that community, it's normally personalized in a way that the student is able to interact with the teacher on a personal basis. So we're trying to also bring that kind of a personalized experience to the students as they're able to learn from this. So we found that there's
Thank you, Nelson.
Yeah. So that's the whole spectrum of the community that I've been able to engage in regarding now education and just trying to build this solution that's able to impact the students that are coming from this community. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nelson. I'll pick up a few themes from there that we can think about. One is, how do we bring together complementary skills? So people with different skill sets that can have fruitful collaboration. But also there's that need to have community, something in common that is all bringing us together. And then obviously to make sure that the technology enables what we're doing. Ada, I can see, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Ada Naganda. If you, would you be able to share briefly a community that you're part of?
Thank you. Sorry, this got me on the way, but let me try to speak a little quick.
Thank you.
I have been a part of several communities of practice, and the first I got participated in, I was developing Calligra. I have a background of technical vocational education and training, and I'm a pedagogue. I'm a teacher trainer of vocational technical instructors. So one of the communities of practice is developing very mindful or very intentional Calligra that can benefit people in Wharton areas. And one, I engaged with some participants, some people from Norway when I was doing my master's program, and some from Southern Sudan, and a few from Uganda. So that was the first community of practice, and we benefited by developing a curriculum for technical vocational education and training for one of the universities in Sudan, which is quite now being operationalized after the Wharton circumstances settled in Southern Sudan. And then the other community of practice is related to, I have a background of home economics, so we have a community of practice of home economics teachers, but we have several trades in home economics. We have clothing and textile, we have baking, pastries, and all that. So we have this community of practice where we occasionally come together, we enrich each other's pedagogical skills, and then the students that we train in the different schools are able to consult any of the teachers in the different schools on their different competences, and also it supports team teaching. For example, if you find maybe you're not good in a certain field and someone else is good, then you can bring them on to enrich your teaching experience, but also your students. basically that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you
And
so much.
we
Oh,
also
sorry.
have a recently evolving one with Zizi Afrique, where we are focusing on how we can make more meaningful learning through focusing on life skills and values. But this is still being it is evolving. So I'm sure it is also it's going to be very useful for me as a teacher trainer, but also for me as a teacher. Yes, to
Yes.
bring in those other aspects that John mentioned that not easy to measure, yet very important for the learners that we teach in and out. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ada. And I think that speaks a bit to the kind of outcomes that we're aiming for from a community of practice, that co-development of tools that are useful across the board, that feeling of being supported by a community, and then being able to enrich our own practice. I think in the interest of time now, rather than taking any more examples, I'd love if people could put in the chat, help us as we then move to design this community of practice. From your perspective, from the 70 plus people who are here today and have tuned in, what would you like to see most from next steps as we grow and strengthen a community? What should we be taking on board? What should we be doing? If you could go to the chat, I think the chat is now open, and write your thoughts in the chat. I think maybe it takes a moment for people to write in, or in fact, people can call out if that's easier. Maybe you'd like to comment on what would be a useful frequency. What kind of platforms? Is a Zoom platform useful? Okay, so we've got a comment here from Joshua talking about sensitizing data custodians. I think that speaks to needing to have bring in a wide range of stakeholders into the community. And I think that's something that really came through for me from the panelists, is how important it is to be engaging researchers and policymakers at the same time. Any other thoughts or comments? Nelson, I see you have your hand up.
Okay, so my comment, I think there's need of that integration between, say, the domain experts and the guys handling the technology. Because handling everything at a go won't be the best way to go. There needs to be that seamless integration between now the domain experts who actually working within those communities in terms of now the education sector, and now the domain experts, that's the people who actually understand how to interpret the actual data, and using the technology that is in existence to be able to come up with the interesting insights that can be able to provide actionable, actionable information for certain actions that now be able to impact these communities. So I think that's where the niche, maybe that's missing. There's a missing bit of that. Yeah, so that's that I can actually provide. Yeah, thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Nelson. Roy, would you like to come in?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, Roy, you've put yourself back on mute.
Sorry, sorry for that. So my name is Roy. I'm an AI researcher here in Kenya. I lead a company. Can you hear me?
Yes.
a leader company called Upeo Labs, and we develop artificial intelligence solutions, especially using generative AI for education. And so on the issue of data, we've had a bit of experience because we just launched a product called Somo GPT, which is basically our take on digitizing the entire national curriculum at a high school level. So we're thinking about bringing home the power that we've seen with ChatGPT, the Geminis, the cloud, to our high schoolers, so that we're able to provide every high schooler an artificial teaching co-pilot of sorts, whom they could ask questions about, let's say, biology, physics, history, whatever the case may be. We've successfully launched this, and we're just asking whether there's any opportunity here to consult at that level, or if the conversation has gone in that direction. And so because I'm sorry I came in late, but I'll be happy to go where necessary.
Fantastic, thank you. So that's a great example of, what we might do as part of this community is connect people who have interesting initiatives, who are looking for partners to make those visible. Just going into the chat, real appetite for both generating but the data synthesis, and we know what a huge challenge that is, but also how powerful it is if we get that right. So I think bringing out lessons on data synthesis will be so important. And again, that data management, data sharing, all very important. Great, good to see that, Roy. People can follow up on your approach to data synthesis. And again, just to finish, because I think this has been such a theme of the webinar, that collaboration and the focus on action.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Joseph from Cameroon.
Yes, please come in.
Joseph. Yeah. I just want to suggest that in this issue of data, we should invest a lot in tackling politicians and stakeholders in understanding what data is and why it is important to democratize data. You will bear with me that data is very, very sensitive. It's a very sensitive issue. And there's a lot of issues concerning data that need to be well understood. So if we don't do this, we will always have difficulties whenever we have to present data or whenever we have to talk about data. So we need a lot of sensitization to sensitize those who are stakeholders in various domains and to understand the importance of data and to understand the importance of using data from verifiable sources, from sources that can be judged as I don't want. I think I want to use the word judged as good sources of data. If we don't do this, we will always have difficulties because now with the social media, we have everybody can generate data and throw it out there. And so we must be careful in this domain and see how we can sensitize the public and those who are stakeholders. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that point. And I think that is something else actually that we need to remember, that this community needs to focus not just on the technical practicalities and enriching ourselves in terms of technical lessons around data synthesis or data sharing, but how can we learn from each other in terms of how to raise the profile of the importance of these issues? How have colleagues in various countries brought policymakers along and helped them to understand what are the critical issues and why they're so important. I think that's a brilliant note to end this session on. And I think, am I handing back to Charles or to Jill?
Thanks, Lucy. You're handing back to me. And we are just about to close for the webinar. I would like to really thank everyone. I'd like to give special thanks to all the panelists for their wonderful discussions around data and how we're working around communities of practice for engagement. We've heard that data is available, though sensitive, but this needs to be made accessible because we need to get to a point where we're pushing to open up data so that it can be used to make informed decisions. We see the importance of community efforts to increase the efforts of use, dissemination, and dissemination of education data. We are also urging the funders to really consider funding dissemination of data while they're funding proposals for research. So this should go beyond just provision of research reports, but also include dissemination of this data. And we see the importance of building capacity of the data users and the data ecosystem, just to ensure that there's proper analysis and the proper use of data. Thank you all for making time to be here with us and to contribute through your chat messages and your questions. We are hoping that we've been able to respond to most of the questions that you provided, but we are so thankful also for providing insights through the chat function. And with that in mind, I'd like to bring the webinar to a close. Thank you so much.